The other thing about Trump, though, is that he hasn't delivered right on a lot of this stuff he's promised. You know, there's been like maybe a sort of mild manufacturing renaissance in a certain communities, but like he didn't make America great again. He didn't return, you know, Detroit to a thriving industrial metropolis and so on. And his popularity rating in a lot of those key states is really in the tank. Is there, I guess you haven't been out there, you know, in the last like 6 months or whatever, but do you suppose there's any sort of disillusionment among some of these core constituencies that pushed him over the line? He said he was going to turn things over, but really it's not that much different.
It's hard to say. I mean, I've been out there, but it's been primarily in core Democratic base, basically Latino neighborhoods and black neighborhoods. But I think people aren't really paying that much attention. Again, I keep trying to I can't overemphasize enough. Most voters don't really pay that much attention beyond life is busy, you know. I mean, I sat in a McDonald's that was for all of January that was 1,000 yards away from the border fence in El Paso. The entire McDonald's. I was there just every day for a month, writing and reading, and the entire McDonald's was people who commuted across the border into Juarez or you know had family there or whatever, and nobody talked about. Not one person talked about the immigration stuff that was going on in the news. Nobody for a whole month. You know, they talked about like traffic and they talked about potholes and they talked about their niece's wedding or whatever. But you know, it's just politics isn't big with a lot of people until at least the people I focus on. But I think, you know, yeah, Trump is very vulnerable this time. It should be easy to. I mean, people know his gimmick, his scam. It should be easy for the Democrats, but if you know, again, if they just, you know, I'm not so sure they won't screw it up because, you know, the Democratic Party itself is so divided that I think it's hard to imagine any candidate within the Democratic Party getting the entire, you know, all Democrats to come out in unison and vote. Whereas, you know, again, it's you got three options. You vote for Trump, you vote for the Democrat, or you don't vote. And the don't vote one is the big question that I don't think anybody who runs polls has any clue about, and it decides elections. I would imagine Trump voters can't be as inspired as they were last time. It's hard to be as excited as they was last time. So I think that the advantage is with the Democrats this time, but we'll see who they nominate and if that person inspires people or not.
So here's a question. So we're like, I think this is all right. Like, we need someone who's going. If Trump's going to get knocked out, it's going to have to be by someone who like excites broad swaths of the population, like throughout the front and the back row, that like a serious change to the system is possible. But the question I was going to have is like, I mean, like, what should the change look like? Like, can we sketch out like what needs to happen? And I think like the prompt that I want to use for this is, Chris, you were on Twitter the other day, and I think Matt Stoller tweeted something about your book where he basically said, and you endorsed the tweet. And what Stoller's lens was that, you know, the front row thinks the way to help the back row is to help the back row become like the front row, right? Like there is this dream amongst kind of like the college educated wonk set that like, you know, literally everybody is going to go to college and have an amazing career and like leave the place they were born in and move to the cities. And it will be like, you know, the kind of glorious urban cosmopolitan utopia. And Stoller's point, which I think you endorsed, was just like, no, like the people in the back row don't want that. They want to like stay in the places they grew up in. They want to like have families there. They want to go to church there and have their jobs there. And they want it to work. They want that to be a functioning, vibrant, livable way to have a life path again. And so I guess the the question, I guess the question is like, what do we think needs to happen, or can we sketch what we think needs to happen for that to be a viable life path again?
I mean, I think that's his takeaway. That was the intended takeaway of my book, which is that basically, the way we can't demand everybody be like us. For we only have one pathway to success, one approved pathway to success, and it's to be like us. And I think that's dangerous. How do you stop that? I don't know. I mean, in terms of policy, it requires, again, a rethinking of the way. I mean, businesses have, businesses are not in these businesses are winner take all because we've created the economy for that to work, where you can run a company from New York City and make all the profits, or from wherever your billionaire decides to put corporate headquarters, and not really worry about where your production is done, or where your assets are. And how does it change to be where the factories are back? Factories aren't going to come back to these towns. We've just I think we have a country of, I mean, that decision has been made and is gone. So I would like to see a broader, I don't think all these things need to be centered in New York City, need to be centered in DC. They can be in other places. I don't know how you legislate that, though. I think you need to. I happen to think one of the ways you do that is you need to heavily regulate Wall Street. You need to heavily regulate the companies. You need to reshift focus back towards giving power to the workers and not to the stockholders. But I think that's generally what Sanders and Warren both support, and so in that sense, I think that's in the right direction.
Yeah, there's a decent example of this actually. This was a major focus of New Deal stuff back in the day. They had all their brain truster people were really worried about the poverty of the South, especially, and how the South was so much further behind in terms of GDP, in terms of education. Just in every infrastructure and so on, and so they really concentrated a lot of their effort into narrowing those gaps to be like, we're throwing down lots of hospitals and roads and bridges and dams and stuff. Tennessee Valley Authority, to try to bring those laggard states up to scratch, so that they have, number one, like decent institutions, and number two, then have the tax base to spend on decent services for their population. That was one thing. There was a big New Deal report on how the Southern education was poor. I mean, it was bad because of segregation and so on, but it was also bad because the states were so poor. They were spending a similar fraction of their economy on education, but their economic base was so much smaller that it just wasn't giving them, they just didn't have enough money. And, so antitrust policy to break up the business, to try to force productive activity out into the hinterlands, running your trade regime so that, you keep, industrial activity within the borders of the country. And, yeah, I mean, it's not impossible, that, automation has gotten rid of a lot of manufacturing jobs, but not all of them. There's still millions and millions and millions of people doing manufacturing of electronics in China and Vietnam and Korea and so on. That's just something the United States has not even not trying, actively encourage that development. So
right, I mean, where we have gotten was not. I mean, it really annoys me when people say where we've gotten is. You see the neoliberals say it was inevitable. No, it wasn't inevitable. It was a choice. All the free trade pacts we put in place were designed so that they knew it would happen. They knew the companies would flee. It was just all about it was all about the bosses wanting the cheapest labor and not giving a fuck about what happened because of that. Again, I don't know how I'm not a policy person. That's not my big strength. I leave it to others to say, like, here's a policy we need to go back to that world. Again, I think Warren. When I look at Warren and Sanders, they both generally are in the right direction, in terms of we need to put more power in labor's hands, less power in the hands of the shareholders. Um, it's just I mean, people should take a look at how Romney made his money if you want to know what how bad modern capitalism is. He never produced anything. He simply, on paper took companies over, then shred them of, um, uh, basically destroyed their what they had built up, and destroyed any labor cost, and ripped away and gutted them in terms of, screwed over the workers, and then just took the money out from that. I mean, it's just that's all they did. It's just that sort of form of capitalism, this brutal efficiency, where there's no sense of social consequences of the actions, is the problem we have these days. And I don't know how you get rid of that. I mean, there used to be a time when it was also not only, the policy was less favorable to it. It was also considered louche to do it. I
Yeah.
mean, it wasn't considered. There was some obligation in some cases of families who own businesses who felt an obligation to the community. That doesn't happen anymore.